filed in the Bondi Beach attack, with authorities now calling it terrorism inspired by ISIS. A reminder that extremism doesn't need territory anymore. In Washington, Trump's chief of staff gives 11 candid interviews, then calls the story a hit piece, accidentally revealing how power actually works inside the White House. And in El Salvador, Bukele and Elon Musk team up to put AI in classrooms because this country doesn't believe in beta testing quietly. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's go. Good morning and happy Wednesday. Welcome back to another edition of RoxomTV News. Now, if you're wondering how a beachfront Hanukkah celebration in Sydney turned into Australia's deadliest shooting in decades, here's where this story stands as of right now. Now, this is unfolding in Bondi Beach, Australia, where police have charged Naveed Akram, the surviving suspect in Sunday's mass shooting, with 59 criminal offenses. Those charges include 15 counts of murder, 40 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent, and 1 count of committing a terrorist act. Authorities say Akram and his father, Sajid Akram, targeted Australia's Jewish community during a public Hanukkah celebration. 15 people were killed, dozens more were injured. Akram's father was killed during a shootout with police at the scene. Now, investigators recovered homemade Islamic State flags, IED materials, and extremist symbolism inside the suspect's vehicle. Police have officially designated the attack as an act of terrorism, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying it appears to have been motivated by Islamic State ideology. Now, Akram remains hospitalized and in critical condition and made his first court appearance from his hospital bed. Police say formal questioning is delayed until medication wears off so he fully understands the charges. The case has been adjourned until April of 2026, signaling a long legal process ahead. 20 victims remain hospitalized across Sydney, one still in critical condition. Now, and as this moves from investigation to prosecution, Australia now faces the reality that this wasn't a momentary rupture, but a defining national trauma that will shape its security posture for years to come. And officials in this case keep using a phrase that sounds abstract but carries some very real consequences. They say the attackers were inspired by Islamic State. Now let's break this down, and what does this actually mean now in 2025? You see, a decade ago, ISIS controlled vast territory across Iraq and Syria and openly directed attacks from the top down. By 2019, that caliphate collapsed under sustained military pressure, but experts say that ISIS didn't disappear, it decentralized. Now, instead of command and control terrorism, ISIS now relies heavily on online propaganda, social media messaging, and ideological encouragement aimed at receptive individuals. That means attacks don't have to be planned by ISIS to serve ISIS. Australian officials say the Bondi attackers recently traveled to Mindanao in the Philippines, and a region once linked to ISIS-aligned groups, before returning to Sydney. Now, experts caution that Mindanao no longer hosts organized training camps, but small extremist cells still exist in fragmented form. Similar inspired attacks have recently been cited in New Orleans, Syria, and disrupted plots inside of the United States. The Pentagon estimates about 2,500 ISIS fighters remain dispersed across Iraq and Syria, while online recruitment remains active. Security analysts note that while the number of attacks has declined over time, the ideological influence has not vanished. Because inspiration doesn't require logistics, it only requires belief. And that reality means the modern terrorism threat is less about territory and more about attention, grievance, and amplification. Joining us to talk about, we're going to move on to our next story of the morning here, gang, so hang tight as we scroll through these, and we're moving on. All right, so our next story of the morning takes us from ideology to enforcement, as this next story begins in Washington and then in the Caribbean, where President Donald Trump has escalated pressure on Venezuela in dramatic fashion. You see, in a Truth Social post, Trump announced a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. He also declared the government of President Nicolas Maduro a foreign terrorist organization, an unprecedented step for a sovereign nation. if enforced aggressively. The move could devastate Venezuela's economy, which relies on oil for over 90% of its export revenue. Most of that oil is sold to China through a network of already sanctioned vessels known as the Dark Fleet. U.S. forces recently seized one such tanker and carried out strikes on boats accused of drug trafficking tied to Venezuela. Trump says the goal is to force Maduro from power. Critics warn that a naval blockade traditionally constitutes an act of war and requires congressional authorization. Venezuela's government has condemned the move as piracy and says it will appeal to the United Nations. Now, oil experts warn that cutting off revenue could trigger inflation, shortages, and widespread humanitarian fallout. Chevron says its licensed operations continue for now, though that could change quickly. The real question here is enforcement, because whether this becomes leverage or escalation depends less on the words blockade and more on how far the U.S. is willing to go to make them real. Joining us to talk about this story and others this morning, we have the man that can connect the dots like no one else, Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, happy Wednesday, and thanks for joining us this morning. How are you?
I love life. I'm enthusiastic about the future of humanity, and I think that all the stuff in Venezuela is signaling that we're in a major shift in energy. Energy is becoming the primary driver in the economy, and everything you should see when you look at what's going on in the Venezuela situation. Of course, the oil would be destined for China, and of course, letting whatever's been going on in Venezuela these years, there's all kinds of conflicting reports about what's actually happening there. Is it a carve out for money laundering? Is it a carve out for transnational crime syndicates to use as a home? We don't really know, but the profiting off of oil in order to fund this stuff and to use it as a dark pool of a stateless type of entity, much like Afghanistan was used for a long time, or Ukraine at one point. It seems to be like one of the last vestiges of these, all kinds of different parties working, not knowing who's really not necessarily even on the same team, but leveraging the statelessness and the lack of state capacity over there to stop criminal entities from operating. Looks like it's the main focus. So, looks like in Bitcoin terms, the kind of thing we've been suggesting was going to happen for a while in this conflict, that energy sources were going to become one of the main levers of this global conflict. And it looks like what we're seeing, and sort of right on time for what Bitcoiners have been expecting.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of complexities and unique instances in this case, Nolan. One of them being the U.S. President Trump's usage of the word blockade. That carries a lot of historical and legal weight, that word. So from a big picture standpoint, Nolan, how different is a true naval blockade from sanctions we've already seen, and why does that distinction matter to markets and foreign governments?
Well, because they were using the oil, the commodity itself, to bring money in and out of the system instead of the normal sanctions. So the normal USD sanction system we've all understood for a long time requires the choke points to be financial. You can get around the choke points, much like Russia does, by sending oil to India. And then, of course, still to this day, Europe is funding the Russian war machine through buying oil from India. So everyone just sort of gets to, do the see no evil tactic in order to get around the sanctions. And so in the case of Venezuela, that's what's been going on, where their banking system isn't connected any longer. Their oil system was, and that oil was going to China and other places. And if you read the U.S. security doctrine from last week, they're reinvigorating the Monroe Doctrine, which means no foreign influence on the continent any longer. If you look at the vote change that happened in Chile this week, that would be very similar. The democratic choices made in Chile align with what we've seen in Argentina, align with what we see in El Salvador. Trump called those three allies in particular for what he's attempting to do in South America. You would see Venezuela on the other side of that equation, but more and more becoming isolated and not going to be able to do the see no evil thing. We're not doing, this has nothing to do with sanctions. We're sending oil. So that'll be done.
Yeah, and with situations like this, I'm always curious about what the implications are, kind of globally. Like, what is the impact here? Because Venezuela depends on oil for more than 90% of its export revenue, and much of that oil, as you mentioned, moves through the shadow fleet that's selling primarily to China. So, Nolan, if enforcement is serious, what happens first? Does the pressure show up in Venezuela's economy, in global oil markets, or in the U.S. diplomatic relationships? Like, what's going to be some of the fallout you expect to see as a result of this?
Well, I would say the note you got 2 weeks ago from who's been called the Seditious Six would be an example of what you should see in that it's very much
Hmm.
targeting sources of narrative, sources of funding. Trump's first 6 months, let's say, were really targeted against the NGO apparatus around the world, the systems that were turning into, what some people say a money laundering operation, or at least a soft power system that allowed, all kinds of messaging and narrative to filter out into the environment. So Trump spent his first 6 months, let's say, wrapping up those avenues. And that money was often going to Europe. That money was often going to Africa and other places. So the messaging piece got sort of tied up and more or less dealt with. There's still some issues, but it's more or less under the thumb now of the American executive branch. Whereas what's going on in Venezuela was really the source of revenue, the other source of revenue for a lot of these folks. So it wasn't just the NGOs. In this case, we're dealing with these states using the oil, the energy, and that stuff to push other narratives along the same line. So, in the same way in your last story about Bondi Beach and what happened over in Australia, there's a lot of people who say that the Australian story is to get people focused on the religious aspects that have really been dominating narrative for the past, 30, 40, 50 years, and to move it away from just the pure who's on what side for energy. So it looks like this
Hmm.
story dovetails with what's going on in the Australian situation and shows that
Hmm.
Trump is not messing around when it comes to re-architecting these energy flows around the world. It's almost the more important, now that America doesn't have sanction power like it used to have, now that there are markets for oil outside of the dollar. Remember, that was the whole point of the Bretton Woods system, was that the oil had a closed loop with the US dollar. You were not allowed to sell oil for any other currency in the world. That's what made BRICS so interesting, is they were going to create a gold market for oil. China, during the Biden
Hmm.
presidency, more or less just said, screw it, we're going to be creating a renminbi yuan market for oil in the Shanghai Stock Exchange. That's running pretty well. So you're seeing that America, because the financial sanctions don't really work like they used to, Russia doesn't even know it's sanctioned. I heard the United States drop the sanctions on the Brazilian judge that was targeting Elon Musk. I can't Morales or whatever his name was. So he had been individually
Hmm.
sanctioned. Didn't work. They just don't even bother. They didn't even bother implementing it. So at this point, because
Hmm.
there's so many workarounds, the energy piece is really important. And so your question about how we should see this stuff play out in the real world, I think you're going to keep seeing
Hmm.
people complain for other reasons. They can't really say why, because you had Claudia
Right.
Scheinbaum say yesterday, "Oh, fentanyl is not a weapon of mass destruction. Don't do it." Well, I don't know any other uses for fentanyl besides the ones we see, and so
Right.
I think you're going to stay in that world, and you're going to continue to have people trying to couch everything in terms of, an abuse of power of the executive branch in America or other narratives instead of just the who's got the energy.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting situation here. And, Trump, like as you mentioned, is not messing around. He's having to walk a really tricky line right now because we've seen the U.S. seize tankers and strike these suspected drug running boats. But you have plenty of critics out there that are warning that this edges toward an act of war. So, in your view, Nolan, where is the line between economic pressure and military escalation? And how closely do investors and global institutions watch that line? Because saying this could be, perceived as an act of war is no small statement.
No, there's something called a realpolitik about it, right? So realpolitik is just a way to interpret politics outside of the theater and drama of Congress or whatever. And so Trump at this point, as commander in chief, remember the US military predates the country even. Trump did the parade last year in June, I think it was, because that was the 250th anniversary of the US military. The US military is older than the country itself. And the job of president isn't just, leader of the free world, it's also commander in chief of the US military. So when you see Trump doing this, the real politic of it is that, of course, he does have control of the military. Now, I understand forever we've had this idea that Congress can only declare war, but the real politic of that is that we haven't done that in years. I don't think we ever officially declared war in America against Vietnam. It has become this idea that the president has to seek a mandate from Congress. Maybe it happened in Afghanistan. I don't quite remember if he got a mandate there. I think there might have been one in Iraq, but it becomes something that most presidents sort of, sidestep. And so, sure, there's going to be calls for President Trump to do this, but again, you're just going to hear more examples about how Obama, for example, was big on the drone killing, what we called extraterritorial, extrajudicial killings. Obama was doing it all the time. And I remember there was even a interview between, I think, Jake Tapper and one of the folks who was part of Biden's national security apparatus when they had killed some families and kids and everything with one of these drones. And they said, well, we're going to look at our protocols. And that was the end of it, right? They didn't really press him on it. So I think you're going to continue to see the, well, he said and she said, and why didn't you? And you're a hypocrite. So now the hypocrite thing just kicks the can down the road because no one really cares about being called a hypocrite. It's just hypocrisy on all systems all the time, right? So calling someone a hypocrite can be said on either side. Everybody is always hypocritical about these things. And calling someone a hypocrite doesn't really move the needle. Like, it's not persuasive because deep down, I think everyone knows everyone individually. I'm a hypocrite in some instances. Everyone can be hypocritical. It's not really a standard that humans keep each other to weirdly. That's why it doesn't work for persuasion. That's why when you call someone a hypocrite, it's just like calling them a fascist or a communist, or how all these insults just go one way between the political extremes, right? You call someone a fascist, they call you a communist, but none of it hits because you've been called it so many times. And hypocrite I would put in the same boat. So you're just going to hear more hypocrite, they're a hypocrite, and this person's a hypocrite, they said but they didn't do. So it'll just stay there. It won't go any further than that.
Yeah, I think being called a hypocrite's kind of a rite of passage for most politicians out there anyway. You're not truly a politician unless someone's called you a hypocrite at least once.
Exactly.
Now, this story we know is coming as a result of a lot of orders we've been receiving from Washington, but our next story we're getting into is actually something that's going on in Washington currently, so I want to talk about that one really quick here, Nolan, because White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles is not known for freelancing, and that what makes her 11 separate interviews with Vanity Fair over the last year so striking. You see, in a two-part profile by veteran Chief of Staff chronicler Chris Whipple, Wiles offered unusually candid assessments of President Donald Trump, his inner circle, and some of the administration's most controversial decisions, from Venezuela to Epstein to Elon Musk. She compared Trump's personality to that of a high-functioning alcoholic, despite his teetotalism, framed him as confident to the point of excess, and openly acknowledged internal disagreements that White House staffers typically bury. She defended Trump against claims of revenge agendas, insisted he won't seek a third term, and dismissed questions about his health, even addressing viral clips suggesting he's fallen asleep in meetings. But the interviews also exposed some internal friction. Wiles criticized Attorney General Pam Bondi for mishandling the Epstein files, contradicted Trump's claims about Bill Clinton, labeled Vice President J.D. Vance as a conspiracy theorist, and offered a complicated portrait of Elon Musk's role in dismantling parts of the federal government. After publication, Wiles publicly blasted the article as disingenuously framed hit piece, while the White House and Trump himself rushed to her defense. The contradiction is the story here. Because while Wiles insists the profile distorted her views, the quotes paint a picture of a chief of staff attempting to balance loyalty, control, and damage containment inside a White House that remains personality-driven and improvisational. Now, this wasn't a leak, it was a window. intentionally opened into how power actually works inside Trump's second term. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, Susie Wiles isn't someone who normally speaks this openly, yet she sat around for 11 interviews, then publicly criticized how the article was framed from a power dynamics standpoint. What does it usually signal when a chief of staff talks this much and then tries to walk it back? What was your beat initially on this situation?
I fall into the kayfabe frame pretty easily when it comes to most of this stuff because I can't imagine that they wouldn't have known that there was going to be some maliciousness or whatever tone they ended up getting from Vanity Fair was predictable from 6 months ago out. Like you could have got them all in a room together and said, this is probably what they're going to write. No matter what you give, they're going to give this kind of a story because they're in the selling of the newspapers and the magazines business. And if they just wrote a story saying, oh, everyone, look at how great it is in the White House, it wouldn't have got any clicks or all that stuff. So the Trump administration, what I like about it is they don't try and hide things, right? I think it's great that they can be candid. It's one of the things that I've always loved most about the way Trump operates, that it's warts and all, that you're gonna get a type of unvarnished truth from him. He doesn't look capable. If you look at the Rob Reiner thing, he's just not capable of creating a kind of focus group speech. He's kind of got to say what's on his mind, and he doesn't really have self-censorship button. It's always what I liked about him. Now, you end up getting, you get the bully. That's where it comes from, right? There's no way he can censor himself, especially if it is about one of these stories. So I expected that they knew this was going to happen, and their reaction to it is just part of the story. It's part of the play. It's part of the drama, that you're always going to get this reaction. They knew they weren't going to be treated well. But what you end up getting is their turn on Vanity Fair, their turn on legacy media. So it frames everything in a way that, you probably couldn't get Vanity Fair in the crosshairs unless you invite them in, let them do what they're going to do, and then create an entire story around it. So this is typical Trump kayfabe, typical Trump embracing wrestling type aesthetics, wrestling type story, narrative control. You bring them in, you create heroes, you create villains, and this way, it's a lot better than just sitting on the sidelines saying, I don't like the legacy news. That doesn't really work. If you let them in and get into a fight with them, then you get everyone immobilized and involved, and you get everyone saying, look at how terrible Vanity Fair is. How could you even sit down for an interview? Look at how they mistreated, Catherine Levitt. Look at how they mistreated Stephen Miller. Look at his picture. They look so terrible. Why would they pick those pictures? So you end up getting the mobilization of the entire tribe, and that's really been the thing for a long time. So you know what they're going to do, and you know how your audience will react to it. So you let it play out, and enjoy the show. It's a show.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it almost makes me wonder if Linda McMahon had some say with the plot points of this one. Because you're right, Trump loves to be in the media. You've heard him boast every time, oh, yeah, that video of me got 300 million clicks or views. And this way they can, in some essence, kind of control the narrative. And that's why a lot of people like Trump, right? He speaks his mind. He tells you how it is. And people identify with that compared to politicians we've seen of yesteryear, right? Like that's kind of part of his appeal.
That's exactly it. And, the Obama was sort of the full realization of that president whose speeches are sharpened through focus groups, and you get 10 great speechwriters in a room, and you get the guy who can deliver it, and in a way that created a distance between the people and the office of the president and made it all look so professional. It's why 80 years of media in DC created a spin, everyone spinning all the time, that the logic of good and bad only really applied in a world that they understood. Most Americans, Republican or Democrat, stopped recognizing the priorities of both parties a long time ago. That's kind of why Trump was very different. That Trump came in and you knew whether or not you agreed with it, he was at least telling you the truth without a focus group. Remember, his first campaign, he was offering something like 10,000 unsolicited words and unscripted words a day to the media. And if you remember the
Wow.
primary Trump, because primary Trump was the greatest Trump there ever was, right? The original Jeb Bush,
Hmm.
low energy, little Marco, all,
Yeah.
those were the days.
Yeah.
And Trump's strategy was literally just to keep the live camera light on. Like that, he could see that when he would
Hmm.
go live, he would see the red lights on every CNN camera. And his only goal was to keep the live light on. Because when he got boring, they would shut it off and show was over. So his entire worldview was keep that light on, say whatever I can say, give them 10,000 words a day, but God, keep that red light on, make sure we're live on all the networks. And he would look at on the cameras. He described this a few times, keep the cameras live. And so that really
Hmm.
was it's to the point that people who loved the Trump of the primaries in 2015 and 2016 had a lot of trouble when he became presidential candidate because that's when he started with the teleprompter. That was his, in fact, original nickname for Obama was teleprompter guy. We're done with teleprompter guy. It was a very good one,
He always has
teleprompter
the great nicknames for everybody. Always
guy.
got good nicknames for everybody.
I
But
wouldn't get him
he
good
kind of
at
reminds me of
night.
like he's like a stand-up comedian. Usually they flash when you got like a minute left, and he's just like, nah, I'm gonna go back into my war chest of jokes to keep this thing going. I want the attention, and it served him well. But what's unique about this particular story, and I want to get a little bit more detail about this, is Wiles' most attention-grabbing remark was her comparison of Trump's personality to that of a high-functioning alcoholic, not because he necessarily drinks, but because of what she described as exaggerated confidence and impulse control. So she went in and said some things about Trump, Nolan, that oftentimes would get people in trouble. But Wiles compared Trump's personality, like I said, to that of an alcoholic, but not as an insult, allegedly, but it was a way to describe his exaggerated confidence. Why is it so unusual and potentially risky for a sitting chief of staff to describe a president psychologically on the record like that? And are you surprised she hasn't seen more blowback from Trump because of this, or are they just trying to handle this part internally? Like this was
No,
surprising to me.
someone who, I've paid very close attention to Trump and media and how he involves himself in it over the years. And from what I can tell, Trump really doesn't mind being insulted or someone speaking plain truth to him. He doesn't really, from what I can tell, I can't mind read him, but he's never shown any sort of inability to handle that. Apparently, he can laugh at himself very well, and you've seen it before. If you remember the Jimmy Fallon messing his hair up, and he's able
Mm-hmm.
to make a lot of jokes in his own world, and it's important that you have that skill. I don't think I would have as much of an attraction to his media character if he wasn't able to laugh at himself. That he can laugh at himself is a
Mm-hmm.
thing. Now, to get into the
Yeah.
alcohol thing, you've got to realize he knows he would be predisposed to alcoholism. It's not that he's not a teetotaler and that he judges alcoholics. His older brother died, and he knew that he
Right.
would have the same preponderance for it. And that's why he's even said, God, imagine me drinking, right? Because he's even admitted
Mm-hmm.
that he's already like that. Now, one of the things that you can see from it is that alcoholics, and I saw some people breaking this down as sort of true, and people even saying, he's got sort of a quick clearance of dopamine. I heard someone explain it, and that is typical of
Mm-hmm.
alcoholics that they can change their mind very quickly because the benefit and the anger can be so close to each other, or the exuberance and anger are so close to each other because literally you just wipe the slate clean and engage a new emotional response almost instantly. And apparently, he might just have that ability naturally. And so, a thing that would
Mm-hmm.
make him it is only going to make him excited for like a second. And then the next thing either will
Right.
make him angry or whatever. So, now none of us can read his mind, so none of us know really what's going on. But that tracks with
Right.
what I observe, right? You see him take a big win, and he'll just kind of shrug it off, and he moves on to the next thing. And indeed, he, by all accounts, was exactly like an alcoholic for that reason. And that Susie Wiles is
Yeah.
able to say that, I think, is a really healthy thing. It shows they have a good relationship. It shows that Trump is able to be honest with his staff in a way that is probably good for America and good for the executive branch. You do need a president who
Mm-hmm.
can laugh at themselves. You do need a president. And he defended her. Yeah, you're right. And I've heard him say that before personally, right?
Yeah. Well, he hasn't always been able to laugh at himself. Plenty of people could make the argument the reason he ran back in 2016 in the first place was because of that White House Correspondents' Dinner where they made fun of him ruthlessly, and you could see him just simmering there. So it sounds like he's okay with it as long as he's top dog, and maybe it's coming from his own ranks that he can control. Is maybe that the reasoning here?
I can't mind read him, but yeah, he was definitely
Right.
upset that night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But remember, he was not, if he would have gone on stage and would have been able
Mm-hmm.
to respond, it probably would have taken all the anger out. But of course, he didn't have a chance to go
Right.
on stage. And, he had his
It's
own
really a
campaign.
shame.
Really, it would have been a great. But you're right. The stand-up comedy thing, right? That's how I've seen him do policy for a long time, right? His speech, he runs
Yeah.
his speech the way stand-up comedians practice material. I believe he got into
Yeah.
Bitcoin because he saw Vivek Ramaswamy get a huge reaction to saying no CBDCs. And if you go back and check the tape, it
Mm.
was the night after the Iowa caucuses, you had the New Hampshire caucus. Vivek dropped out right away, flew to New Hampshire to be on stage with him and said, no, Trump is going to be the nominee. He won Iowa. Doesn't look like anyone can beat him. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go campaign for him. So he went there and he was able to give a speech. You'd never heard Trump talk about CBDCs or Bitcoin before publicly. And so he gives the opportunity to Vivek to speak publicly. And if you go back and watch the tape, you'll see it. I saw it live. And Vivek says, no
Mm-hmm.
CBDCs. And the audience goes crazy. And Trump
Yeah.
does exactly what a comedian does. He goes, whoa, the audience reacted. That's a good policy. And he's been doing
Mm-hmm.
that. He tests material, he tests policies on his live audience, and he goes with a policy if you get a reaction, and he'll drop a policy if you don't get a reaction. So, very much a
Right.
stand-up comedian's technique.
Yeah, he definitely has a knack for honing in on things that I guess maybe to me don't seem important, but the American people apparently do, like Gulf of America. There was no point in my life that I ever think that was something that needed to change, but he tested it and people liked it. So, And what was also interesting about this piece with Susie Wiles, Nolan, was that she openly criticized Attorney General Pam Bondi for mishandling the Epstein files. She referenced J.D. Vance as being a conspiracy theorist, and she even corrected Trump's claims about Bill Clinton. So my question for you is, inside an administration that is built heavily on loyalty, how significant is it when a chief of staff publicly contradicts both the Attorney General and the president and calls the vice president a conspiracy theorist?
Again, I think it lends to credibility in the sense that we're getting away from any world where you can script that kind of kumbaya world, right? The whole idea
Mm-hmm.
that an entire executive branch involved in multiple front wars around the world, domestically and abroad, to imagine that these people all think the same way all the time would be, it's kind of quaint. It's kind of like a bygone era. When we heard from Richard Nixon, when Richard Nixon released his Nixon tapes, one of the big shocking realities was the Nixon tapes, which are all available, all published. You can buy the book. It's so different from the messaging that came out of mainstream news or legacy media at the time that you could really see the delta between talking points in the media and what actually was said in the White House Oval Office. And so that delta really bothered
Mm-hmm.
people. Nixon miscalculated. He thought when he released the Nixon tapes that people would rush to his side and see that Watergate was not really a big issue. In the end, the delta between what he was saying and what officially was being said was so great that it shocked people. And I think we've been living in a world for years, and it was right up into Obama's time, where the distance and the difference between what was actually being spoken and what was being spoken publicly became so obvious. If you go back to that 2015, 2016 time period when Trump first came around, you'll remember that one of the things that people said, that people who liked Trump back then was, because back then people were very off put by Trump's language, right? Trump, when it was a bit
Mm-hmm.
like what you saw from the Rob Reiner thing this week. It was that, but every day back then. You shouldn't say that if you're a president. You can't say that. You can't say that. So it was in that period where you had a lot of people say, and a lot of people who defend him, the early MAGA people would say, well, what he's saying is just what everyone says at the bar. It's just locker room talk. If you remember,
Hmm.
locker room talk was
Right.
literally the talking point used about the Billy Bush thing, right? So Trump
Yeah.
has always benefited from locker room talk and a less of a distance between what publicly is being said and what's being said internally. So he will benefit from this. His administration, all the people involved, the Kennedys of the world, they like the authenticity. They like that it's warts and all. And I think they like working in that
Hmm.
environment instead of having to be on narrative control all the time and align narrative. Because the truth
Yeah.
is, and tell them this, he would get treated by Vanity Fair the same way. They would find a new way to write the article and get people in the drama. So you might as well just give them the truth, or at least the truth as you know it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he is Teflon Don or the spin doctor, so, he's going to get the message out that he wants. That's what makes him such a good
What was his
marketer.
old
We're going to move on here. Go ahead. Go ahead,
What was
real
his
quick.
old? Remember when he was his old, when he was his own press agent, and he had he had a name for himself, and he would call up
Did
people
he?
when, yeah, yeah, those are the best. Where
I
he
don't
was his
remember
own
this.
press agent. Oh yeah, you got to get them. They're like recordings from the 70s and 80s. It's like, and it's obviously him, and he would pretend,
Oh my gosh.
Mr. Trump is not happy with your coverage, and it's just very obviously
He
Donald Trump.
He's fun, if nothing else. He's fun in certain areas. All right, moving on though. We're going to move from Washington now to Hollywood as this next story centers on power, leverage, and certainty as unfolding right now in Los Angeles and on Wall Street, where Warner Brothers Discovery has told shareholders to reject Paramount's hostile takeover bid. Instead, the board is backing a deal with Netflix. Paramount offered $30 per share in cash, valuing Warner Brothers Discovery at about $108 billion. Netflix countered with a cash and stock deal worth roughly $83 billion, focused on streaming and studio assets. So why choose the lower number, right? Well, because Netflix offered certainty, no fragile financing structures, no reliance on sovereign wealth funds, no doubts about closing. Now, the Warner Brothers Discovery board openly questioned whether Paramount's backers, including the Ellison family, would fully commit at the finish line. Netflix's deal, they said, was clean, executable, and fully funded. Paramount insists its offer isn't final and could return with a higher bid. Shareholders are watching closely, and regulators will eventually weigh in. But for now, Warner Brothers Discovery is making a clear bet that in today's media landscape, the deal that actually closes matters more than the one that makes the loudest headlines. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, on the surface, this looks a little counterintuitive. Paramount offered more money, yet Warner Brothers Discovery chose Netflix. For viewers at home, what does certainty of close actually mean in a deal like this, and why can it outweigh a higher headline price?
Well, yeah, the higher headline price did have a lot of strategy, let's say, to finish. You've got to buy out the individual shareholders. You've got to reach a certain threshold. What's happening to the price? They've got to get locked in at the buyout price, which is not the market rate. So it does turn everything into a bit of a roulette game where there are five or six or seven different areas where the deal could collapse. So although there is more money up front or more money in the long run, it's not obviously going to the corporate treasury. It's obviously not going directly into a buyout package. It's directed at actual individual shareholders and then the people who control those shares. So I could see why the Paramount deal was a little more convoluted. But remember, it's been that way from the beginning. The initial bid was just to enter into exclusive negotiating rights with Warner Brothers, and they already chose Netflix for having a lower bid before because of the exclusivity of actually finishing the deal. So this was a hostile takeover because it was already trying to get involved in what Netflix had already acquired, which was exclusive negotiating rights. Because there wasn't ever a deal to actually buy Warner Brothers straight out. It was an exclusive negotiating period with the deal more or less looking like this. And so it was,
Mm-hmm.
one of a full buyout. The hostile bid from Paramount came
Yeah.
in middle of this exclusive negotiating period. So already it showed a certain willingness to be flexible, change the offer, get involved. Maybe Netflix is not even focused on closing right now. They really do think they can get a higher deal if they keep going with Paramount. Now, I also think that the Netflix deal had some form of stock swap. So there's an upside to the Netflix deal that the Paramount one I don't think necessarily has, because Paramount isn't
Hmm.
exactly a high performing public equity in the same way that Netflix is. Netflix is part of FANG, right? It's one of the great US
Right.
equities now. So I think there was a stock swap there. So that changes the upside because if the stock of Netflix goes up, then the Netflix deal is actually a lot bigger for Warner Brothers. I don't think it necessarily is based on some of the intelligence around the people behind the finance of this. So I don't know if that's baked in or anything, but at least it's there. Whereas the Paramount deal, it doesn't really look that way. And then I also think that there are things that Paramount wanted that Netflix doesn't want, right? I think there were some TV
Hmm.
channels involved, and some of the live sports wasn't necessarily that attractive, but they are much more attractive to Paramount. So it's kind of a different deal. So I don't think closing per se, even if that's what they say, has everything to do with it. I think it has a lot to do with potential upside, the amount of components of Warner Brothers that are going to go out and what they can actually keep after the fact. So I think there were a few more details around it that were probably more of a factor. And like you said, I
Yeah.
do think it's going to keep trying because this is existential for them. They can't lose this. Paramount is not just going to be
Right.
the place platform. It's going to be for lack of a scale, the 20th place, even though it's technically in third. The delta between two and three is fake at that point. It's like second place
Yeah.
in American football. There's really only America, and then like the silver medal
Hmm.
winner of Olympic American football. Who cares? They're not real, right? It's not a real
Yeah.
thing.
Ricky Bobby
So
said, you're not first, you're last. And that's kind of the
exactly,
situation here.
exactly.
And there still seems to be a lot that will be written about this story. But if we step back right now, Nolan, this kind of feels like a broader signal about the media business right now. So my question is, what does Warner Brothers Discovery choosing certainty over spectacle kind of tell us about how legacy media companies see their future in a streaming dominated landscape now? What's the read you're getting on this?
Well, I think it all comes back to financing. And because Netflix has a lot more access, a lot less debt, right? They have a lot less debt.
Mm.
Their model has worked. You can see the complementary aspects of the IP coming with Warner Brothers fitting in nicely with Netflix that doesn't have that stuff, right? It doesn't have
Hmm.
huge prestige. It doesn't have Game of Thrones, doesn't have Harry Potter, it doesn't have these properties, and they could use these things, right? That's what's sort of lacking on the platform, the DC
Hmm.
universe brand, right? That's all really important stuff if you're going through it. And so when I think of the media landscape, right? It's like, how do you not get more debt? First of all, how do you avoid the debt thing? Well, Netflix is just not under the same problems. They have way more access to capital. They're not pulling all of these COVID blockbuster busts, all of these flops, all of these movie failures that have happened. I mean, just look at the year, right? I mean, all of these studios are having a hell of a time. There was $1 billion film all summer, and that was the Jurassic Park movie, and that was not great. Let's be honest. I've seen the
Mm.
movie 100 times. I
Yeah.
get it. Dinosaurs run away, scary. Why are we here? Oh, God, right?
Yeah.
Movie. No, I watched on the airplane last week. I thought it was, but I didn't finish it even because of landing and all that. And I'm not like clamoring to find out what happened. Guess what happens, right? We all know.
Right.
So Superman underperformed. You're getting, and if you go look at the other side of it, you go look at Disney, that's kind of a best case scenario of one of these studios. And I don't understand how they made any money this year. I mean, the amount of flops,
No.
Snow White flop, up and down, all of the Marvel movies flops. If the new Avengers thing next year doesn't work out, where are they going, right? The Thunderbolts failed. All the movies are failing, and
Yeah.
it's not just superhero fatigue. The movies are no good. People don't want to see them,
Yeah.
and so you got this whole situation of maybe they're telling you the truth, which is the movie studio thing and the going to the movies thing looking sketchier and sketchier as the day goes on. And when you go with the Netflix deal, you
Hmm.
don't have to worry about that anymore. Whereas Paramount, it's all of that and more. So as
Right.
far as just being an executive saying I can get money, I can go with a stable finance plan with Netflix that is actually making content. They don't need $1 billion at the box office to make it viable. I mean, look at the Superman movie this summer.
Hmm.
Everyone said if the Superman movie this summer doesn't make 1 billion US trash tokens, it's a flop. And that's a lot
Right.
of money to get a movie. And it was a flop in the end, right? And it
Yeah.
still did great. It made a lot of money, just not enough.
Right. Well, between all these underperforming blockbusters and all the streaming services seemingly being consolidated in one roof, it sounds like we're getting cable back, and the media future is looking pretty bleak for us out here, but we'll see how it ends up playing out. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, guys, but we're going to be back with Nolan to discuss the latest Bitcoin pullback, and will we see the price dip down even further? All that and more on Roxom TV News right after this. To our Bitcoin story of the morning. Now, if this most recent pullback we've been experiencing feels different from past downturns, that's because it is, and it's unfolding under circumstances the market hasn't really seen before. Across global crypto markets, Bitcoin is now on track for just its fourth annual decline ever, and notably the first that isn't tied to a major scandal, fraud, or industry-wide collapse. Bitcoin is down roughly 7% for the year, trading in the high 80,000 range after reaching a record above 126K in early October. What's confusing investors right now is that the usual reasons for panic simply aren't there. In earlier down years, losses followed clear shocks like the Mt. Gox collapse in 2014, the ICO bust in 2018, or the FTX meltdown in 2022. This time, though, the backdrop looks far healthier. Institutional participation has expanded, regulation has matured, spot Bitcoin ETFs exist in the United States, and the current administration has openly embraced crypto as a strategic priority. And yet, momentum has seemingly faded. Trading volumes have thinned. More than $5 billion has flowed out of U.S.-listed spot Bitcoin ETFs since October, and derivatives markets show little enthusiasm for betting on a near-term rebound. Even persistent buying from Michael Saylor's strategy has failed to provide a lasting floor. Bitcoin has also decoupled from traditional risk assets, with the S&P 500 up about 16% this year and sitting near record highs, while Bitcoin continues to drift lower. Now, beneath the surface, analysts point to excessive leverage as the key vulnerability. When roughly $19 billion in leveraged positions were liquidated in early October, the rally abruptly stalled, exposing just how dependent the move had become on borrowed momentum. Since then, large holders have steadily sold into strength, liquidity has dried up, and market depth has fallen sharply, making prices more sensitive to relatively small trades. Now, rather than a collapse, some market participants now see this as a prolonged consolidation, with Bitcoin potentially ranging between $70,000 and $100,000 as excesses work themselves out. For investors watching from the sidelines, the takeaway is less about panic and more about patience. Bitcoin itself hasn't broken. What's being tested instead is whether this market can move forward on conviction and capital rather than leverage and hype. Bringing Nolan back to chat about this. Nolan, this is shaping up to be one of the rare years where Bitcoin is down without a major scandal or collapse driving it. What does a quiet decline like this why does a quiet decline like this tend to confuse investors more than a crash with a clear cause? It's been a unique year. What do you think?
Well, I mean, what I see is heavy manipulation by people trying to accumulate in size. What you see is institutional players get involved. The very sophisticated end of Wall Street is now not treating this anymore as some kind of risk asset. This is sort of a primordial must acquire situation. You even see there's good news in this, right? NASDAQ moving trading over the weekends. They're going to be doing 24-hour a day trading. That should push some of the risk appetite folks over to there and more of the people who
Right.
are just betting on a new system, which is, I think, what's happening. So I think Bitcoin is now caught up in the entire struggle around the subordination of the Federal Reserve argument and whether or not Trump gets control of the Federal Reserve and imposes his own interest
Mhm.
rates on it, or if we're living off the last the last fumes of the independent Federal Reserve or whatever people refer to it as. So I think that you're
Hmm.
going to see the ability to manipulate Bitcoin fall apart once Bitcoin comes in the center of the new American arrangement. For example, if you have Besant issue a bit bond, for example, right? So imagine if Besant is
Hmm.
out there selling US debt, but attached to it without any interest, but attached to it is Bitcoin. You're going to have a whole new size of purchaser way beyond what we've seen from Michael Saylor before. But if we do
Right.
indeed get Trump and Besant taking control of the Federal Reserve, which essentially means taking control of interest rates. If they are the ones taking control of
Right.
interest rates, they've said it's going to be below 1%, right? So it's going to be below 1%. We see they're not probably going to have a choice. We see the yen carry trade winding down on Friday, perhaps. You're going to see
Hmm.
the Japanese raise interest rates. Anytime that's happened, Bitcoin has dumped. So we can expect that Bitcoin is being caught up in all of these resetting of the table between Japan and America and the Federal Reserve. So within all of this, you do have these huge institutions like JP Morgan and others trying to be well positioned for the change. And so you can
Hmm.
expect them to manipulate the market. It's not like they're your friend, right? All the timing we've seen from FUD coming out about MicroStrategy or strategy by JP Morgan, the no delivery of the shares, yet they're coming out with a product the same day, right? And now all of a sudden they're going to be
Right.
using MicroStrategy. So the timing of a lot of this stuff suggests that the big players see a game being played. They're not fully in, but they're definitely hedging, and it
Hmm.
looks like they're eating the lunch of a lot of Bitcoiners because we're not used to being manipulated.
Hmm.
The price of Bitcoin has been manipulated in each cycle, but never by people with this much ability. And it looks easy, right? News is good. They
Right.
rattle the cage. Everyone starts selling
Yeah.
coins, and they're acquiring. So when I hear Larry Fink and Jamie Dimon say what they're saying and the market not reacting in the way we would expect, you can imagine there's some under the table stuff going on, and you don't have to hallucinate too much to fill in the blanks. We'll know for sure if we're right about this by next year, and if Trump does take control
Right.
of the Federal Reserve, which it looks like everyone he's going to announce is sort of a Bitcoiner or Bitcoiner adjacent, and all the candidates that are around. And it looks like more of
Hmm.
with Stephen Moran, that's another guy you're going to see there. So the rumor is the Mar-a-Lago Accords, the Mar-a-Lago system, which is a system that would replace the Bretton Woods system. It would replace all the fiat
Hmm.
currency which have existed since World War II. Much like Argentina, it's going to roll it into the US stablecoin system, which is a loaded gun against foreign countries, right? America can
Right.
issue interest on the stablecoin in other countries, but not domestically. So Americans are going to be subsidizing the weaponization of the stablecoin US dollar. And so you add to that Bitcoin in the picture, you add to the idea of the administration embracing Bitcoin at that time, and you can see right away why it's being manipulated. And you can tell that it's not going the way we predicted because it's more tied in with the actual administration now. And when we see the
Hmm.
administration embrace all these new changes to the global financial system, to the Federal Reserve's relationship with the Treasury, you can imagine that the ability to front run or manipulate Bitcoin will fall apart very quickly once you have something like a bit bond.
Yeah, no, something definitely is going on behind the scenes because we've never seen as many favorable tailwinds as we're seeing now, but the price action certainly has not reflected that, at least as of late. And analysts are pointing to leverage as being a key factor for that as well, especially after roughly $19 billion in leverage positions were liquidated back in October. So, my question for you, Nolan, is how does excessive leverage change the way Bitcoin rallies actually form? And why does it make those rallies more fragile?
Well, when you look at the order books on exchanges, which are usually public, you can see these buy walls, right? You can see buy and sell walls based on where all the margin traders are lining up. So, the bear whale, the famous bear whale story back in early Bitcoin was that it was a bear who had all of these derivatives set for sell orders, buy orders, and it had to be attacked. You had to kill the wall. So over the years, we've seen these walls fall. And if you're a real experienced trader, you can see where they are. That's what all these people doing the astrology for men, the technical analysis are looking at all the time, is they're looking at positions where a bunch of orders have been placed. So because it's transparent enough that people can see where they are, that's all they're doing is they're just targeting them, and they know they can liquidate into either end of the shorting or the longing of the asset. So they can see the different sell walls and buy walls built up, and they just act accordingly. They just liquidate them and then they move on. So it's a way of shaking the tree.
Hmm.
If you're a sophisticated trader and you know all of these technical analysis configurations, this is child's play to you. This is easy. And from
Hmm.
what I gather from a lot of the technical analysts, they're kind of laughing at the retail Bitcoiners for getting played so hard, heavily, and consistently by the big players because they're basically telegraphing their whole plan. I mean, you saw it with the Nakamoto shares, right? When the Nakamoto guys said, we're going to buy a huge stack, and then the market collapsed right after they bought it. This was, by all intents and purposes, deliberate. I don't know the whole backstory about what goes on there and what happened, but you saw the chatter online saying, of course, these guys are going to go and scalp it. They call it scalping or headhunting or whatever, right?
Hmm.
There's a militant language to how these people approach these markets. And it's nothing personal or sentimental. They just see how the chips are lying and they bet accordingly. The point is to get more Bitcoin. They don't really care at what
Hmm.
price, doesn't make a difference, but if they can manipulate it to get the better price, they will.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this was something we probably should have always expected. Once Bitcoin got big enough, we had to, expect these big institutions and the trading financial sharks that come with it to start swimming in these waters as well. And these are some of the things that are ultimately going to happen as a result of that. So, we shouldn't all be that surprised. But as you know, this is all temporary, and Bitcoin's going to infinity forever. So, Well, Nolan, we got to wrap up today. But as always, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Roxom TV News. And you have your amazing show before, so gang, if you haven't already, check out The Great Awakening. Tell them where they can find it and what time it's on every day, Nolan, because they won't want to miss
We're
it.
on every day from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can find us right here on Roxom TV. If you want to add comments, we have our own channels on Roxom on Rumble. So you can see Bitcoin on Rumble, and that's where I get the comments because we try and do it like live radio. It's kind of like talk radio. Like we like the live comments and we
Yeah.
like to. So if
Hmm.
you want to leave a comment and interact, then you go on the Rumble feed, which unfortunately doesn't have the Chiron if you're a big fan of the Chiron, but you can see a lot
Hmm.
of Rumble hosts over there and have a good time with all of us. So 9 to 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Eastern Time, right here on Roxom TV.
Yeah. Well, it's always a pleasure interacting with you, Nolan. So enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time, hopefully very soon. All right.
Hopefully
We're going to
tomorrow,
take a
Heath,
quick
we'll see
break
you.
here at. Yeah, we'll see you. So they already pulled you off the screen. All right, Nolan, we're going to see you tomorrow. Gang, we're going to take a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we've got more of today's top stories, including Trump expanding the travel ban. So what that might mean for you and your travel plans come this holiday season. Stay tuned. More Roxom TV News underway. Yeah, same. But hey, that's why Ledden exists. They're the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans, over $9 billion issued since 2018, with a perfect record protecting client assets. Now you might be asking, Hank, what makes a Ledden loan different? You see, with custody loans, your collateral, it stays put. They don't go degen and lend it out for yield. There are no credit checks. It funds in under 6 hours, no monthly payments. You could repay anytime with zero penalties. And for transparency that grown-ups actually want, proof of reserves reports every 6 months, verified by a top accounting firm. The bottom line here, gang, is Ledden lets Bitcoin holders unlock their liquidity without selling. And you can check them out at ledden.io/RoxomTV. That's ledn.io/RoxomTV. And welcome back to hour number 2 of Roxom TV News on Wednesday here, December 17th. Let's start this hour with a quick reset on the 2 stories driving the headlines this morning. First up, we had in Australia. The surviving suspect in Sunday's mass shooting at Bondi Beach has now been charged with 59 criminal offenses, including 15 counts of murder and a terrorism charge, after authorities say the attack targeted the Jewish community during a public Hanukkah celebration and was inspired by Islamic State ideology. 15 people were killed, dozens were injured, and investigators say extremist materials and improvised explosive components were recovered at the scene, making this the country's deadliest attack in decades and one likely to have long-term consequences for Australia's security and counter-terrorism policies. Meanwhile, in Washington, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles is under intense scrutiny following a series of unusually candid interviews with Vanity Fair, where she offered blunt assessments of President Trump, internal tensions within the administration, and missteps surrounding the Epstein files, before later calling the article a disingenuously framed hit piece. That contradiction has turned what was meant to be a profile into a revealing snapshot of how loyalty, power, and damage control are being managed inside the White House during Donald Trump's second term. Now to our top story of the hour. If it feels like America's front door just got a lot narrower, that's because it did. You see, this story is happening in Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump's administration has officially expanded its travel ban, increasing the number of countries facing full or partial restrictions on entry into the United States from 19 to 39. Let's take a look at this map here by the Washington Post highlighting the banned countries. Do we have the map? No map. So the ones that were highlighted, well, we don't have the map. So anyway, countries newly facing full bans include South Sudan and Syria, while nations like Nigeria are now subject to partial limits. Citizens of Laos and Sierra Leone, who previously faced partial bans, are now fully barred from entry. The order also places full restrictions on people traveling with documents issued by the Palestinian Authority. Now, the new bans are set to take effect January 1st of 2026, and the White House says the move is part of an aggressive immigration crackdown following last month's deadly shooting in Washington, where an Afghan immigrant killed 2 National Guard members. Officials argue the ban is about national security, pointing to terrorist threats, high visa overstay rates, corruption, and unreliable civil records that make vetting difficult. Critics counter that pattern is hard to ignore. Now, all 39 affected countries are non-white, nearly half are Muslim majority, and almost all are low to middle income nations. Supporters say the policy closes loopholes and prioritizes safety. Opponents say it punishes entire populations for risks posed by a few. Lawful permanent residents, existing visa holders, and diplomats and athletes are exempt from this. But for future students, workers, families, and asylum seekers, the door is now effectively closed. And as this ban doubles in size, the larger question for Americans watching at home is whether this marks a temporary security response or a permanent reshaping of who gets access to the United States at all. Now, if you're wondering where the next real-world test of AI in public education is happening, the answer isn't in Silicon Valley. The story is unfolding actually in Central America, where President Nayib Bukele has announced a partnership with Elon Musk's AI company xAI to roll out Grok across the country's public school system over the next 2 years. Musk publicly endorsed the initiative, resharing Bukele's post and praising the move as putting the most advanced artificial intelligence in the hands of an entire generation. Under the plan, Grok will be integrated into classrooms from first grade through high school, acting as a personalized AI tutor that adapts to individual students. xAI and the government say they will jointly develop the curriculum, data frameworks, and teaching methods needed to support the rollout. Bukele framed the partnership as a leapfrog moment for education, positioning the country as a proving ground for how AI can scale learning in a developing economy. Supporters see it as bold. Skeptics, though, they see it as being premature. World Bank economist Magdalena Bendini, who has worked with the government on education reform, noted that while basic education is a priority, major hurdles remain, especially for students in rural or hard-to-reach areas. In short, AI tutors only work if students can, actually access them. This move also fits a familiar pattern from Bukele's administration. The country grew global attention in 2021 by adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, a decision wildly criticized at the time and later praised by Bitcoin advocates for its long-term vision. Musk has consistently voiced support for Bukele, calling him an amazing leader, while Bukele has described Musk as one of the great minds of our time. Whether Grok in classrooms becomes a model for the future or a warning about moving too fast will depend less on the hype and more on the execution. But once again, this small country has placed itself at the center of a very big experiment. Now, joining us to chat about this topic and others today, please welcome to the show the Bitcoin strategist, digital nomad, and proud Salvadoran Bitcoiner, Pamela Posada, everybody. Pamela, welcome to the show. How are you this morning? Thanks for joining us.
I will say AI just started right now and it's not gonna stop. So I will say that it's better to us to adapt. And we already know that AI is a big mass thing that it's happening in the world. So I'm really excited about what things are happening in El Salvador. And it's for principle, we were talking about education system that I just graduated like 5 years ago from university, and we just still have the same educational system in around the world. So I will say that things like this is just can help to students to adapt to the modern society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bukele sure has been forward thinking during his time in office, and he's framing this as a leapfrog moment for education, similar to how Bitcoin was positioned a few years ago.
Yeah.
So, Pamela, from your perspective, what does leapfrogging really mean for a developing country, and when does it actually work versus backfire? Do you think that Bukele's on the right track here, or is he maybe moving a little too quickly here in an AI world where we still don't fully know the ramifications and consequences of AI?
Well, I don't think it's quickly because AI is, we've been in adapt for the last few years already. So it's not like it's not big something very fast. Already AI just adapt and really evolution away to the last few and in the last months. So I will say that right now it's a really good time to try to do something different. And right now we can do it with students and education system that we already, for example, right now, if you're working remote, you need AI tools already. And some of the, for example, in El Salvador and also in Latin America, we have many remote workers that doing like virtual assistant. That right now, I will say that it's the moment that these kind of people they will need to adapt to a new society because there are many things that AI already automate to work in a work society, in a task that many people are really currently work online. So if you are not using AI already, you are kind of you are not in the you are not in the position to negotiate to a new work or a new kind of related evolution to you to yourself.
Right. And Pamela, you've talked about how Bitcoin wasn't just financial for you, but also educational and mindset changing. Do you see AI tools like Grok as something that could genuinely change how young people learn and think, or is the risk that it becomes more hype than help? How do you see this influencing people's educational behaviors going forward?
I think it's depend of the person because at the end it's a tool. You can control that tool. So at the end it's like it can be beneficial for people to see these tools in a different perspective and not just fear them. Because at the end, if we try to, for example, prohibit or not allow those things in the high school and university, doesn't mean that people are going to use it. So I will say that it's better to give the tools to this young society because it's not just for high school. It's also going to start with the first grades, the first grades at school. So it's going to be for everyone. Of course, this is a kind of a new project, so we really don't know how this can affect in the future. But I will try to be positive because we have the same scholarship educational system for the last 50 years. So it's really good to see something different. And also El Salvador is trying to put Bitcoin also in part of the subjects to people, to students to learn about Bitcoin. And we can see that in kindergarten that right now El Salvador have a small start to create a book it's gonna help to kids, students to learn about not just about Bitcoin, just it's also about money. And I don't know, but for example, when I was in school and nobody teach me about finance or personal finance in that time. So right now it's a good time to just do things different to really help to push the society in a good way. Because at the end, if this is a small country, but this can be replicated to other countries as the Bitcoin legal tender in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, El Salvador has really been doing a lot of things different. In fact, they keep seemingly volunteering to be the global experiment, right? First with Bitcoin, now with AI in classrooms. Pamela, seeing as this is your home country, how do you feel about El Salvador kind of becoming the test case for a lot of these big new ideas? Is that something that excites you, or does it worry you because that's literally happening in your backyard?
Well, I think it's exciting to me because nobody talked about El Salvador like 5 years ago, and now people are just start to look in El Salvador in a position that try to understand what we are doing, and they try to also replicate in their own countries or in the cities. So, for example, right now El Salvador, well, first Bitcoin legal tender was something big to me because that's how I get to Bitcoin. Bitcoin was in 2021, and just I get to Bitcoin in 2022. So it was thanks, some way, thank you to the Bitcoin legal tender and also Bitcoin country. And I think that right now things like AI, it's our present already. It's not the future anymore. It's we can use those things already to educate students and not try to avoid them, because at the end, I don't know for example, I don't know how students are learning things already when you can use, for example, AI to know many things, like a tool, like a way to be more productive. Because at the end, for example, to me, I use a lot of AI in my currently work because it's easy and it's also effective if you're using correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I am glad, a little glad you guys are doing the AI in the classrooms first, because if the
Yeah.
robot overlords end up taking over, we'll at least be like, oh, we saw what happened in El Salvador. Don't want that here. So, obviously, I'm joking. But, one question I got to ask you, though, Pamela, is the way that El Salvador is approaching, Bitcoin and now AI in the classrooms kind of reminds me of the old adage with tech companies. It's move fast and break stuff, right? Which is exciting, and that's how progress is made. But it also, things fail a lot of the time when that happens. So I guess my question is, seeing as both of these kind of experiments are happening in your own backyard, what are you kind of hoping the rest of the world learns from watching these events play out in El Salvador?
Well, I just hope that more people get to this kind of path, because I just saw a video today about Bernie Sanders saying that this is scary for what the AI is doing for us. And it's like, of course, depend of the perspective, because at the end, if like people say that we are depending too much of technology, and that's also true. But it also depend how you try to manage those things, because at the end we just start to have those AI tools without any experience, right? So at the end it's just a work in
Right.
progress. And I think that's just exciting, and also make me think very bullish about what El Salvador is still leading right now. And I think that if we have those kind of things doing in El Salvador, what can happen in a country like a first world country already? And El Salvador is just a
Right.
small country that try to do things that no others countries are trying to. So I think that that's why El Salvador try to do and push like AI and adoption, like these tools, like in a perspective that they can be beneficial and not just scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of as you mentioned a few minutes ago, nobody was really talking about El Salvador 5 years ago, but now El Salvador has really carved out a nice place for itself on the map, and people are looking to El Salvador as to how the future might look for the rest of the world. So El Salvador could emerge from this in a very different place than where it started only 5 years ago as a result of early Bitcoin adoption and now using AI in educational systems. So it is some exciting times over there, and we're going to get into that and more about you right after this break, and we're going to get into our deep dive and talk more about you, your background, what you're up to now. So stay tuned, and stay tuned, Pamela, and our audience as well. We will be right back after this quick break with more. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. Pamela, I want to get into a little bit about your journey into the Bitcoin space. So let's start with what happened before Bitcoin. You were living a very traditional life in El Salvador. You had the 9 to 5, you were commuting, there was routine. Can you paint a picture of what your day-to-day life actually looked like before everything changed and you dipped your toe into the orange-pilled water? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I started Bitcoin in 2022, and before that, I was a fashion designer in El Salvador. I graduated and I was working like 5 years on that. And I was really excited because at the end, like just started a career that you enjoy, that you love, and you say, I can do this like a
Yeah.
living. And that's how I started. And then I just realized that money was not enough. I didn't have enough to be independent, and I was still living with my parents. And I feel like what I'm doing different than my parents did it. Why to me it's kind of
Right.
difficult to just start to do my life and not dependent to my family. So I was like kind of angry at the same time. I didn't know it was just me. It was something that maybe my career was not good. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the system it was not working, but I didn't exactly know why. So I was in that path to understand because at the end I had a 95 job and I feel kind of stuck because first it was they required me on site. So that's mean I have to wake up early, I have to go to my work, have to work more than eight
Right.
hours a day, and I feel like this is not the life that I want. And I felt like I was doing that for 5 years and it was not good. Then when one time I was looking for my holidays that time my boss told me something like, well, I don't think we're gonna give you like the days that you are asked. Maybe we are gonna give you less because we need you here on site, and yeah, we're gonna pay those days. So it was like then I just realized that I didn't have the sovereignty to control my time. So it was not just about I didn't have sovereignty about my money. Also didn't have sovereignty about control my time and do with my free time whatever I want. Because at the end, I have to be trapped in a system that keep me working. And at the end, I didn't have more time to do more things for me because it was kind of feel like after you be working more than 8 hours, you feel kind of tired. So I didn't have time to do something else. I didn't feel productive. I was just living in a trap. And then when I started looking for a new job, and one thing that I did it was to learn English because I say, okay, maybe I need to work looking for a remote work, maybe something different I didn't study, and that's how I get to Bitcoin because I start to improve, looking to improve my English, and that time, Bitcoin was already legal tender. I was just ignored. So I just get to many, for example, Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador, El Sonte, just to looking for people to talk, and I was looking to improve my English, and I just say, okay, these guys maybe not don't speak English, don't speak Spanish, so I'm gonna try to improve my English, and maybe they have to understand me because at the end that's how I feel it. So that's how
Yeah.
I get to Bitcoin because indirectly I was looking for improve my English, and then I just start to meet many Bitcoiners and just want really get to me to really show me or teach me what Bitcoin means. So once I understand that what Bitcoin it was for me, like in that time was like, okay, this is too good to be true. How is it if
Yeah.
Bitcoin is so good, why not many people are talking about Bitcoin? So that's how I get to
Right.
Bitcoin. And then just 6 months later, I just start to work earning Bitcoin because I was just looking for a way to get to Bitcoin. So I say, okay, I'm gonna start to do whatever just to earn Bitcoin and work remotely. So in that time, I would just start doing video editing. And to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, I never did it before, but I was in the path to just adapt to a new kind of work and do something that really motivate me to do and improve my life and also to learn something new. And that was Bitcoin means to me. So just I changed completely my career, completely what I was doing in this society, and just decide to get all in on Bitcoin. So after that, I've been working
Mm-hmm.
like already 3 years in the Bitcoin space. Right now, sometimes video editing, but my current job is like a Bitcoin strategy, Bitcoin YouTube
Mm-hmm.
strategy for some companies. They want to build a name in the YouTube. Because at the end, YouTube is a big
Mm-hmm.
platform, and we already have many
It is.
competitors like crypto, that to be honest it's a big noise around about what is Bitcoin means. So that's how my currently
Mm-hmm.
work is. It's just to improve the YouTube strategy, making better
Mm-hmm.
thumbnails, better titles, reach to a better audience and grow in a really organic way to YouTube, because
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the biggest platforms to people use right currently to learn something like me. And like me, for example, first if I want to looking for something new, I just look in on YouTube. So many people do the same.
Mm-hmm.
So YouTube is a big platform for people to looking for answers. And sometimes what we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to do right now, it's like people understand Bitcoin and not get to the Bitcoin crypto noise that sometimes can be really
Mm-hmm.
difficult to get to real education. So that's what I try to do with different channels.
Very cool. And yeah, your journey is really unique and interesting. So you actually got into Bitcoin as an effort to improve your English. Then you kind
Mhm.
of liked what you heard and started digging deeper into the space. And
Yeah.
that often seems to be the pattern I see for a lot of Bitcoiners out there. They learn
Mhm.
about it, but then it takes them some time for it to really click, and they have to do
Mm.
their own due diligence to kind of really
Yeah.
make sense of it. Because sometimes it's like it goes up, it keeps going up forever. Like, is this too
Yeah.
good to be true? Is this a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah.
Were there any thoughts like that you had initially? Because or did Bitcoin, you heard about it and it kind of just clicked for you, or did it really take some time to kind of really ruminate on the idea of Bitcoin before you felt like you could go all in on it? What was that process like for you?
Well, yeah. For example, I get to Bitcoin a year after get the legal tender. So at the beginning, when Nayib Bukele
Mm,
announced like Bitcoin, I was like, okay, I don't know what is this. To be honest, I didn't get into that. And many Salvadorans have the idea that it was something from the government. So there are many misunderstandings with the way that get implemented in El
mm,
Salvador, that maybe fail in that way, because not many Salvadorans understand Bitcoin at that time. Even right now that we still have a really good adoption, even if we are not anymore legal tender, we still have a good adoption. You can have a life here in El Salvador like Bitcoin only. But even right now, some Salvadorians are still scared about it. So in that time, I didn't feel scared. Just ignore it, because it was something I didn't understand. And Bukele tried to implement Bitcoin using the Chiva wallet, that was a government wallet. And many people, because we have to understand that El Salvador is really poor, so many people live in a daily basis. So that's mean that they're working in the day, that's what they have to spend for groceries, for
right.
pay something. So it's like really, when we get to Bitcoin in El Salvador, it was from intermediate from Chivo wallet, and Chivo wallet tried to it started like this idea to, oh, we are gonna give you $30 on bitcoins so you can start your Chivo wallet. So it was real easy to register with your ID, and once you are register in the Chivo wallet system, you get the $30 free bitcoin. But many Salvadorans, what they did was just to go to the ATM, to the Chivo ATM, and withdraw the cash. So not many people really understand what Bitcoin means. And in that moment, I didn't
Yeah.
withdraw the cash, but it was really easy, because we are many big lines just in front of the ATM. Just people try to try to withdraw that money. And in that moment, I just feel like, okay, I'm not gonna do that big line just for get to $30. I was currently working, so it was like some that money. I didn't have in the past. And well, I just decided, okay, I just gonna keep that money in the Chivo wallet because in the end, it's like, it doesn't start me. So that was my first take about Bitcoin. It was something like unique, but at the same time didn't have the time or really didn't get to get too deep about what is Bitcoin means. So in that moment, many Salvadorians just get to the different idea that maybe Bitcoin was from the government, maybe Bukele was benefit from this, and yeah, it was many
Right.
misunderstanding about it.
Yeah, I'd be curious, as someone who's lived it in El Salvador, Pamela, what has the reception and perception of Bitcoin been like back when it was originally introduced 5 years ago to where it is now? How has that evolved in El Salvador? Do you feel like the majority of the population now is very accepting toward Bitcoin compared to how it was initially? Or what has that process been like? What are you seeing as someone who's actually lived it?
Well, I feel that right now it's improving. It's still a lot of people that really don't want to understand Bitcoin. They're really fear about what Bitcoin means. Because for El Salvador, we also need to understand the culture and the society here. Many people are still living in just with cash. For example, if you go to a small grocery store in your maybe in your city, you're gonna find that the little mini grocery store they don't accept for example card. They only accept cash. So to many Salvadorians, cash is the only way that they understand money. They don't like for example now many Salvadorians have bank accounts, and that's why I will say that even right now it's an improve. For example, San Salvador, it's a big improve that in some places accept Bitcoin and still accepted. For example, you can go to a Starbucks and buy your coffee with Bitcoin. Go to Walmart and buy your purchase with Bitcoin. But it's still like in the society Salvadorians, it's well, we are still growing on that way. We still have like a good education that different projects here in El Salvador trying to educate Salvadorians because at the end at the beginning, the ones that really benefit about Bitcoin legal tender was just people outside El Salvador, people that come to El Salvador because they saw an opportunity to live with upside with the system, and not many Salvadorans in that time understand it. Even right now, I have many friends that they're really scared about Bitcoin. Even if I've been in Bitcoin around 3 years already, they still believe that, oh, this is kind of scary, you know. Even if they can ask me questions, this at the end is a Bitcoin get to you, or Bitcoin get to people in a different ways. That's, for example, mining can be about technology, can be about sovereignty, but at the end, you cannot push the people to understand Bitcoin. They have to come to you and and they have to ask their own questions. So at the end, is I see a big improve because, as I said, Bitcoin is not legal anymore, but that doesn't mean it's prohibited. You can live here in a really good way to with Bitcoin. For example, I pay my data internet, my phone internet, just with Bitcoin because it's part of the platform. They asking like you select or debit card or credit card and then say pay with Bitcoin, and it's part of the system.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's why that you can do a living with Bitcoin, but it's still growing. At the end, the adoption is just something organically. It's not even if we already saw that El Salvador was one of these first countries that tried to implement Bitcoin. At the end, it's the society who decide how can be beneficial for them or just ignore it.
Yeah, Pamela, I was really excited to have you on today because as someone who is not just a young Bitcoiner, but specializes in Bitcoin media strategy, what are some of the most common misconceptions you're still seeing right now from people outside of the Bitcoin community? And when you're helping develop media strategies for Bitcoin companies and Bitcoiners, what are some of the messages that you find people are trying to deliver right now as we're in a very different place for Bitcoin than we were just a year ago right now? So to recap, what are the biggest misconceptions you're seeing, and what are the narratives that Bitcoin companies you see are trying to develop right now in this new era of Bitcoin?
Yeah, for example, right now, people are still believe it's a scam. Even if we have already like different tools, different projects, and right now, for example, if you search on YouTube what is Bitcoin means, you're gonna find really good content already about Bitcoin, and you can educate yourself about it. But it's still like that. We have free tools like YouTube that you can search whatever you want. People are still looking, not just still thinking that it's a scam. Somebody control Bitcoin. For example, I remember like at the beginning of the year, I was in a car and we get to a ride to one of the surfers in El Salvador, just in my way to El Sante, one of the Bitcoin beach, and we asked him like, "Hey, do you know something about Bitcoin?" Because he was a surfer. And he said, "Oh yeah, I think I met the CEO." It's like, what you're talking about? It's just that there are many misconceptions about it because people really believe that somebody controlled Bitcoin, and some people are still believing that even right now that we have better tools to understand, educate yourself. Just people try to ignore it because at the end, when something is really good, like we are talking about a limit amount of 21 million Bitcoin, people still believe in that it can be just a disadvantage for the society. And no, they don't see, like, for example, they still believe that for example, if we're talking about price, people will still believe that, oh, Bitcoin is so volatile, and they don't understand that the
Yeah.
reason Bitcoin is so volatile in present. For example, right now, just sorry, we have like 88K, and yesterday we have 86K, and people just get scared. So, for example, those kind of things, people don't understand that the reason why Bitcoin is too volatile is because we're trying to compare with the US dollar, and the US dollar is the one that is
Right.
losing its value every single day. So, yeah, there are little misconceptions about it, and some people still believe it's a Ponzi scheme. And, for example, people still believe in that is something that you trade, that in the end, trading is
Right.
gambling. And for example, right now I'm working in women with Bitcoin women adoption in Latin America, not just in El Salvador. And one thing that many when I get to women get to me is like, oh yeah, I would like to invest in Bitcoin. And you understand that, okay, investing in Bitcoin is something that maybe people misconcept about what is Bitcoin means. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can invest in Bitcoin, but this is the way that is saving in Bitcoin. And yeah, it's just
Right.
a few things that there's still like people believe it's sponsoring scheme, people still believe in it's something a scam. And yeah, in the beginning that we didn't have enough information about Bitcoin 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was really easy to get a scam. Right now, it still
Right.
happen, but that's something that it can avoid it if you really try to understand Bitcoin before do something with your Bitcoin.
Yeah, and the understanding is really kind of the linchpin here, right? Because we have a lot of Bitcoin creators out there that are incredibly smart,
Yeah.
but they kind of struggle to explain what are ultimately very complex ideas in a clear fashion that
Hmm.
resonate with the John Q public, right? So my question for you, Pamela, is how do you help people turn these complex Bitcoin concepts into content that regular viewers actually want to watch and will pay attention to? What's your strategy there?
For example, what we are trying to do, my focus is to lead with the stories. People can get to, for example, women, they are more emotional. And also, well, if we're talking about how we can lead the stories with Bitcoin, it's about really easy way to daily basis. For example, really easy things that you can empathize with those things, and then helps to people really get to Bitcoin a different perspective, not just to get rich or get money. It's about Bitcoin can means
Right.
many things for different people. So at the end, we try to live with the stories, and specific in the case with women, that for example, women needs to be more the way that women the way where women get to Bitcoin, there are many not in the same way like guys. For example, many of the men are starting a Bitcoin because they're start to trading, they're start to looking for,
Right.
I don't know, technology. They want to see if this is something like you can hack. and they have the system that the women try to get to Bitcoin because they try to be protective. They try to thinking about not just about themselves, they also think about support the families and support communities. And that's the difference between male and female. At the end, that we are trying to, or I trying to do, is the people understand Bitcoin in an easy way that you can do it in daily life, daily
Right.
everyday life.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned that you're a big proponent of encouraging more women to get into the Bitcoin space. In your experience, do you have to approach women in a different way when introducing them to Bitcoin as opposed to the male audience out there, or does the same tactic work for both?
Well, in the end, the tactic can both work for both because right now we have different kind of content about Bitcoin. So Bitcoin can be very educational and you can have different perspectives about Bitcoin. For example, mining, that is really a different rabbit hole if we're talking about Bitcoin. But at the
Yeah.
end, with women, I cannot talk in my first take with a woman not can be about mining because at the end,
Right.
we may have a big gap of information about first about what is about financial finances and then about technology, and Bitcoin means both things. Bitcoin means technology and Bitcoin means
Right.
financial. And right now, even if for example the 80% of the women are the ones who are charged on the own house and the households, doesn't mean that they're the ones like looking for the money. So at the end, it's like women need to understand that Bitcoin is money, and Bitcoin can be
Right.
the solution for your generational wealth. And yeah, when we are talking about with females' perspective, yeah, we try to have a different take to them to understand Bitcoin because if we are talking about Bitcoin as a technology, can be just I just love women audience there because women need to understand Bitcoin in not like a tech talk. Or for example, right now we're trying to have more women adoption in different meetups in El Salvador and also in Latin America. That first, for example, if you go to a Bitcoin meetup in your city, most of the time it's gonna be just male and a male audience. And if we want to get to more women, that can be something scary because then the other's like, okay, and I'm the only woman in here, and that can be it's not a space that women can try to ask questions because at the end they're gonna look ignorant and they just feel like they have to protect themselves and don't look like, oh yeah, I don't know anything about Bitcoin. Maybe I'm not gonna ask any question because at the end I don't want people to judge me. That's the perspective of women when they get to places that at the end it's just and the majority are just guys. So we try to have our first take just with women audience in a space that they can feel comfortable to ask questions, and that can be with another women. Because, for example, if you ask to a guy what is his role model, it's gonna say that it's another guy. It's very weird that it's gonna mention this a woman. So it's the same with women. Women need to connect with another women because it's at the end it's like women's perspective can understand each other. So that's how we are trying to build a Bitcoin women community. I did this in El Salvador at least this year ago, and also I trying to do it in different other countries like Paraguay and Colombia. So yeah, in the end, Latin America have some similarities, but at the end, the perception of women can change depending of the country. So there's also needs to adapt to depend of the country that you try to lead more women.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, you're trying to meet these audiences where they're at and push the levers that ultimately are important to them. And you mentioned storytelling, and that's a great way to go about it because storytelling is kind of a universal language. So that impacts men, but it also impacts women in their own unique and different ways, which could definitely accelerate adoption for them in that regard. And in your experience as someone who is an expert in Bitcoin related media, what separates Bitcoin channels that steadily grow from ones that kind of stay stuck for years? What do you see in the channels that are doing it right from the channels that could use some work?
Okay, first, I will say the reason that many channels are stuck first is because, for example, the algo is just changing. YouTube algo change every year, every month. So you have to adapt to the new algo. So, for example, if you're doing the same thing like 5 years ago, it's not gonna reach to any audience already because right now the algo push. For example, if we are talking about YouTube channels, Bitcoin YouTube channels, we need to understand that first you have to have a main idea and before to start to talk about other things. For example, you can have a Bitcoin channel, but if you start to talk about like um, mining or technology or the US dollar or the Fed, it's like too many subjects that in the end it's just
Right. You got to have a
The Bitcoin
niche.
algo. Yeah, you have to have a niche because at the end the Bitcoin algo, the YouTube algo is not gonna understand what is your audience. So at the end it's like
Right.
the YouTube is not gonna push your channel. And the past, for example, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was so easy to get to 10,000 views. Right now, it's not like that easy anymore because right now we also have a more YouTube channels than in the past, and this
Right.
number is gonna still raising. So it's gonna be more difficult to you to get to your niche, to get to your audience. So first, you have to focus in one point, one niche, and even if you want to have more other subjects around your niche, you have to always
Right.
join it to your point. That, for example, if we're talking about Bitcoin channels, your main point is going to be Bitcoin. But even if you're talking on another and different other things like finance, about what the news or politics, it's like at the end you have to do the full side, the full circle about Bitcoin. Because
Right.
at the end, it's like your audience not gonna understand what was the reason that he watched at the beginning your video.
Right. You got to set those expectations and then you got to meet them at some point. Otherwise, your
Yeah.
audience and the algorithm are a little confused. And one other
Yes.
thing, and we have a lot of viewers that watch this show that I'm sure have their own channels. So my
Yeah.
question for you, Pamela, is how much of YouTube's success actually comes down to strategy versus consistency versus simply not quitting when growth feels slow? How important is it to just show up every day? Is that maybe equally important to strategy? Is it more important? What do you think is the real lever that drives growth on YouTube right now?
For example, yes, consistency it's important because at the end the algo needs to grow and the algo is gonna
Right.
understand about it. If you're consistently post videos every single week, for example, if you consistently have like, oh, okay, I'm gonna post a video per week, okay, the algo is gonna understand and they're gonna have more metrics from because you and they're gonna have more analytics because you are
Right.
consistently work on that, but at the end it's kind of stuck because, for example, if you can have very lucky and you're gonna have, for example, one video that's gonna have, I don't know, like 30Ks in your, maybe
Right.
your channel is very small and maybe you're gonna get to more followers just for one video, but at the end that can stuck because you're not having any strategy. So if you're repeating the same video, or for example, the same idea every single video, people just gonna get bored too. So you have to be consistent. At the same time, you have to be a good content in the long term. Because, for example, many people or many Bitcoin channels also try to get to clickbait, and clickbait can be
Right.
also a bad strategy in a long term because you are just looking for get those clicks. But at the end, it's like, for example, right now we have to understand that Bitcoin price also can benefit to your audience because at the end, like Google search get to more people about Bitcoin just because of the price. But at the same time, for example, if the price drop, your audience can also drop. For example, bull market, bear market, it's also one thing that you have to understand if you are doing Bitcoin content. So yeah, at the end, it's like consistently, it's a really important part because you have to be consistent in what you're doing. But in the end, is you have to understand how the strategy and your content is working. Because at the end, you're gonna be doing this for 5 years, and maybe your videos are not gonna get to any organic growth And that's the idea with Bitcoin channels right now. We try to be organic, get to more big audience to understand Bitcoin, because the idea is not just to get to Bitcoiners. The idea is to get to newbies to understand Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, it definitely seems like it's a combination of consistency, but then also implementing a strategy. Otherwise, you're just kind of flying blind out there. And luckily, YouTube offers really good advanced analytics where you can get all the information from that stuff. And if you still can't do it, the good news is they got people like you out there to help steer them and their channel in the right direction. So Pamela, we're running out of time here today, but before we let you go, I'm sure you have certainly piqued the interest of a number of YouTubers in our audience today that might be needing their own help with their channels. So if they wanted to get more info on you and figure out how they could optimize their viewing on YouTube, what's the best place I could send them to get more information?
Well, you can find me on X. On X, I'm like a Pamela Posada, Pamela with double E. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can see more about my work, because at the end, I try to show with what I'm working right now with other channels, how you can implement this kind of ideas in your own channel, because at the end, Bitcoin channels are different and they have different other stories.
Right.
So you can have a podcast, you can have a newsletter, you can have a channel about news at the beginning, but it's like there are many. Right now we have different Bitcoin content, and that's not, you don't have to be competing with another channel. You only have to have your own voice. So I can help you to find what you feel really good right now, and we can do it in a really good position to push your channel. So you can find me on X, and you can find me on LinkedIn, like Pamela Posada.
Amazing. Well, Pamela, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your journey and your expertise in this space. We are all super appreciative of your time, and we look forward to chatting with you more down the line. Keep fighting the good fight, and we love seeing more of the great Bitcoin-related content you are pushing out. So thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and a happy holiday season.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you, Pamela. All right, gang. Well, that's a wrap of a Wednesday edition of Roxom TV News. If you haven't already, do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV. And as always, thanks for joining us on today's show. We will be back tomorrow, Thursday, at our normal time of 8 a.m. for more world news and Bitcoin-related chaos. So until then, stay safe, stay informed, and I will see you boys and girls tomorrow.